Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today, we are going to be exploring Christianity. The heart of it is expressed by a leader who's dedicated his life to it, President M. Russell Ballard. His address, The True, Pure, and Simple Gospel of Jesus Christ,
Mhm.
really caught my attention. And to help us unpack it all, all the nuances, we have an expert with us.
It's a pleasure to be here. President Ballard's perspective is certainly unique. Having served as mission president and now in the Quorum of the 12 Apostles for over 40 years, he brings a lifetime of experience to this message.
Over 4 decades. Yeah, it's a lot of time to witness both the joys and struggles of faith.
Mm.
What struck you about how his background influences this particular message?
It's interesting. He doesn't shy away from the reality of hardship. In fact, he lists poverty, war, natural disasters, all these things we know bring suffering. But he doesn't stop there. He goes on to say that amidst these trials, true peace and happiness are still possible, specifically through discipleship to Jesus Christ.
Wow. It's like he's saying, I've seen the worst, but I've also found the best, and this is the path. I'm really curious about this idea. He keeps returning to the true, pure, and simple gospel of Jesus Christ. It sounds almost paradoxical. How can something so profound be simple?
He's talking about getting back to the foundation, what he calls the saving doctrines of Christ, stripping away any extra layers and focusing on the core principles that are essential for salvation.
Okay, that makes sense. So what are these essential building blocks?
He outlines 5: faith in Jesus Christ, repentance, baptism, the gift of the Holy Ghost, and enduring to the end. It's interesting to think about these not as separate items on a checklist, but as interlocking pieces of a foundation.
I like that. A foundation.
Yeah.
It implies strength, stability. And if these doctrines are the foundation, what would you say are the materials used to build a life of faith on top of them?
He's very clear on this point, love. Specifically, the 2 great commandments, loving God and loving our neighbor. He argues that these aren't just nice sentiments, but the very fuel that powers Christian practice. Without love, even the most outwardly good actions lack their true purpose.
So it's not enough to just go through the motions.
Exactly. President Ballard seems to be saying that our motivation matters. Are we serving others out of obligation or out of genuine love? Are we observing the Sabbath just because it's expected or because we find joy in connecting with God? The difference is significant.
I see. So how does all this translate to the daily life of someone trying to live these principles? He mentioned specific church activities.
Yes, several ministering, for example, which is all about caring for others, takes on a whole new dimension when we see it as an act of love, not just another to-do list item.
And how does he connect this idea of simplicity to activities like Sabbath observance?
It's fascinating. He actually uses the word joy multiple times when discussing the Sabbath. He seems to be pushing back against the idea of it being a restrictive list of rules. Instead, he frames it as an opportunity to truly rest and recharge, to experience the simple joy of being in God's presence.
That's a great point. It's easy to get bogged down in the shoulds and forget the heart of the matter. He also mentioned things like family-centered religious learning, sharing testimonies, and temple work. How do those fit into this framework?
He doesn't go into great detail on each one, but he links them all back to those 5 core principles. He seems to be emphasizing that even though these activities are diverse, they're all expressions of the same underlying faith. It's like he's weaving together a tapestry where each thread, though unique, contributes to a unified picture.
That's a beautiful image.
Yeah.
And speaking of unity, how does he address the role of the church itself in all of this? It's not just about individuals living their faith, right?
Right. He takes a moment to quote the church's own handbook, which states that the church's purposes are to help members achieve spiritual goals, strengthen families, and assist those in need.
Those sound like pretty broad goals.
Mm.
How does he make them feel personal, applicable to the individual?
What stood out to me is that he highlights how these seemingly simple purposes actually address some of our most fundamental human needs. The need for connection, for purpose, for belonging, for support in times of difficulty.
So even though the church is a large organization, it's ultimately focused on meeting individual needs, on providing a framework for personal growth and connection.
That seems to be his point. And it's interesting how he links this back to the idea of simplicity. He emphasizes that focusing on these core purposes can help us find peace and happiness in a world that often feels chaotic and overwhelming.
So it's about prioritizing, about cutting through the noise and focusing on what truly matters. Before we go any further, I want to touch on something he said about testimony. He made a point of encouraging simplicity even when sharing deeply personal spiritual experiences. Why do you think that is?
I found that interesting as well. He specifically says to avoid turning testimonies into travelogues or elaborate stories. It seems he's advocating for a more focused, heartfelt approach. Maybe it's about recognizing that the power of a testimony lies not in its length or complexity, but in its authenticity, in the genuine conviction behind the words.
That makes a lot of sense. Sharing from the heart without any need for embellishment. It's a powerful idea. But how do we even cultivate those authentic experiences in the first place? How do we find that genuine connection with the divine that fuels a truly powerful testimony?
That's a great question, and I think it leads perfectly into the next part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
We've explored the foundation of faith, the importance of love, and the role of the church. Now let's delve into the more personal aspects of the journey and how we can cultivate those deep, meaningful experiences that strengthen our own connection to God.
I'm eager to hear more. But before we move on, I want to ask you what has resonated most with you from what we've discussed so far. What nugget of wisdom are you going to take away from this part of President Ballard's message?
For me, it's this idea of finding joy in simplicity. He doesn't just mention it in passing, he keeps returning to it, connecting it to every aspect of faith. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes we overcomplicate things, and in the process we lose sight of the joy that comes from a simple, heartfelt connection with God and with others.
I love that. It's a great reminder to pause and reflect, to strip away the unnecessary and focus on what truly brings us closer to the divine. So to our listeners, we'll be right back with part 2 of this deep dive. We'll explore the personal journey of faith, how to cultivate those authentic experiences, and how to navigate the challenges that inevitably arise along the way. Welcome back to our deep dive into President Ballard's address. Before the break, we were talking about the power of simplicity and how that applies to everything from Sabbath observance to sharing our testimonies. But how does this translate into navigating the challenges of faith? Because let's be real, those challenges definitely exist.
Yeah, he doesn't shy away from that, does he? In fact, he specifically mentions the importance of enduring to the end, which might sound passive, but he frames it as an active process.
Interesting. What do you mean by active? Isn't enduring more about withstanding hardship, kind of like weathering a storm?
That's one way to look at it. But he seems to be suggesting something more dynamic. He talks about constantly striving to become more Christ-like, about making choices each day that align with our faith. It's not about just surviving the storms, but about using them to grow stronger, to refine our character.
So it's about those small daily decisions that ultimately shape our journey.
Exactly. And he acknowledges that those decisions aren't always easy. We face temptations, doubts, distractions. But he also offers this incredibly reassuring message. We're not alone in those struggles. He emphasizes the role of a loving God who supports us, and the importance of a community of fellow believers who can offer encouragement and guidance.
That resonates with me. Sometimes it's easy to feel like we're on this journey alone, but remembering that sense of community can make all the difference. Speaking of community, we touched on the role of the church earlier. How does President Ballard connect this idea of enduring to the end to the larger purpose of the church?
He circles back to those 3 purposes outlined in the church handbook, helping members achieve spiritual goals, strengthening families, and assisting those in need. But this time he emphasizes the collaborative effort involved. He talks about priesthood and auxiliary leaders, ward councils, missionaries, and members all working together in a balanced effort.
So it's not a top-down approach. It's more about everyone contributing to a shared vision.
That's how I interpret it. He seems to be advocating for a sense of unity and shared responsibility in creating a community where people can find support, strength, and guidance on their individual journeys.
It's like a safety net woven from individual threads of faith, all working together to support each other. I also notice how he keeps bringing things back to this idea of simplicity, even when talking about something as complex as the structure of the church. What do you make of that?
I think it's brilliant. He's constantly reminding us not to get lost in the complexities, the logistics, the doing of religion. He wants us to remember the heart of the matter. And he even links this back to joy. He says, and I'm paraphrasing here, that it's in simplicity that we find peace, joy, and happiness.
Wow, it's almost counterintuitive, isn't it? We tend to think that bigger, more elaborate efforts will lead to greater results. But he seems to be saying that sometimes the most impactful actions are the simplest, the ones that come from a place of genuine love and connection.
I agree. It's about stripping away the distractions and focusing on what truly matters. And that can apply to so many areas of life, not just within the church. Think about our relationships, our work, even our hobbies. Sometimes we get so caught up in achieving some external measure of success that we forget to find joy in the process itself.
That's a powerful point. It's a reminder to be intentional and ask ourselves, is this bringing me joy? Is this aligned with my values? Or am I just going through the motions?
Exactly. And if the answer is no, maybe it's time to simplify, to refocus, to reconnect with what truly brings us life and purpose. President Ballard seems to be suggesting that this process of simplification can be a key part of enduring to the end.
It's like clearing a path through the underbrush, removing the obstacles that prevent us from moving forward on our journey. It makes the path easier to navigate, and it allows us to focus on the beauty that surrounds us.
That's a lovely analogy, and it brings to mind something else President Ballard touched on, the importance of personal testimony. He emphasized keeping testimonies simple and focused, avoiding those travelogue testimonies that sometimes crop up.
Yes, he really drove that point home.
hmm
What do you think he's getting at there? Is it just about saving time, or is there a deeper message?
I think it goes beyond time management. It seems he's advocating for a more authentic, heartfelt approach to sharing our faith experiences.
So it's not about proving anything to anyone or trying to impress with elaborate stories. It's more about expressing what we truly feel in a way that's genuine and relatable.
Precisely. It's about vulnerability, about connecting with others on a heart-to-heart level. And that kind of connection can be incredibly powerful regardless of the length or complexity of the words we use. It's the emotion, the conviction behind the words that truly resonates.
That makes me think about how we often complicate things when we're trying to explain our beliefs, especially to those who might not share them. We feel the need to build a complex logical argument, but maybe that's not always the most effective approach.
That's a really interesting point. Perhaps President Ballard is suggesting that a simple, heartfelt expression of faith can be more persuasive than a convoluted theological treatise. After all, people connect with authenticity with genuine emotion.
And maybe that's a key part of this whole simplicity theme. It's about stripping away the pretense, the need to impress, and just sharing what we truly believe in a way that's clear, concise, and heartfelt.
I think you've hit on something really important here. It's not just about simplifying our language or our rituals. It's about simplifying our approach to faith itself. It's about letting go of the need to overcomplicate things and trusting that a simple, genuine expression of faith can be incredibly powerful.
So as we move into the final part of this deep dive, I want to challenge our listeners to think about this. How can we apply this principle of simplicity to our own lives? How can we strip away the distractions and focus on the core elements of our faith, the things that truly bring us joy and connect us to the divine?
That's a great question to ponder, and I think it's one that each of us needs to answer for ourselves. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, but President Ballard's message offers us a valuable framework for navigating that process.
He's given us a lot to think about. But before we jump into the final part of this deep dive, I'm curious to know what stood out to you most from what we've discussed so far.
I think what's really struck me is the idea that enduring to the end isn't just about gritting our teeth and waiting for something better. It's about actively engaging in the process of becoming more Christ-like, about making choices each day that reflect our faith and bring us closer to God. And he makes it clear that we're not alone in that journey. We have a loving God who supports us, and we have a community of fellow believers who can offer encouragement and guidance along the way.
I love that. It's a reminder that even in the midst of challenges, even when the path seems difficult, we have the resources we need to keep moving forward. So for our listeners, stay tuned for the final part of this deep dive, where we'll explore President Ballard's closing remarks and discuss some key takeaways that you can apply to your own journey of faith. As we wrap up this deep dive into President Ballard's message, it's interesting how he manages to balance the personal and the universal, like he shares his own insights and experiences, but it feels so inviting, almost like he's saying, come along with me on this journey. Let's explore these ideas together.
Yeah, it's true. He's not presenting himself as some, infallible authority figure dictating what we should believe.
Right.
He's more like speaking as a fellow traveler, someone who's found meaning and purpose on this path and wants to share those discoveries with others.
Right. And he even acknowledges that the journey of faith, it's a lifelong process. It's not about reaching some final destination, but about continually striving, learning, and growing closer to God.
He uses that phrase, enduring to the end. But he's quick to point out that it's not about passively waiting for something to happen. It's about actively engaging in the process of becoming more Christ-like, making choices each day that reflect our deepest values and aspirations.
Yeah, and he doesn't sugarcoat the reality that those choices aren't always easy. We're going to face challenges, setbacks, moments when our faith is tested.
Absolutely. But he also emphasizes that we're not alone in those moments. We have a loving God who supports us. And we have a community of fellow believers who can offer encouragement and guidance.
That sense of community seems to be a recurring theme throughout his message.
It is. He keeps circling back to this idea that faith isn't meant to be lived in isolation. It's about coming together, supporting each other, and working collaboratively to create a world that reflects Christ's love.
It makes me think about how often we try to compartmentalize our faith, keeping it separate from the rest of our lives. But President Ballard seems to be suggesting that it should permeate everything we do. All our relationships, our work, our interactions with the world.
I think you're right. He's calling for a more holistic approach to faith, one that integrates our beliefs with our actions, our values with our daily choices. It's not about just believing the right things. It's about living those beliefs in a way that transforms our hearts and our world.
So as we reach the end of this deep dive, I want to pose a final question for our listeners. If you were to strip away all the complexities, all the external trappings of religion, what would remain? What is the essence of your own personal faith journey? What is the core that sustains you, that brings you joy, that guides your steps?
That's a beautiful question, and one that each of us needs to answer for ourselves. There's no right or wrong answer, but I think President Ballard's message offers us a valuable roadmap for exploring those deeper questions. He reminds us that at its heart, faith is about love, about connection, about finding meaning and purpose in a world that can often feel chaotic and overwhelming.
Absolutely. He challenges us to simplify, to strip away the distractions, and to rediscover the joy that comes from a simple, heartfelt connection with God and with others.
And he reminds us that we're not alone on this journey. We have a loving God who supports us, and we have a community of fellow believers who can offer encouragement and guidance along the way.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into President Ballard's message. We hope it's given you some food for thought and perhaps even inspired you to explore your own faith journey in new and meaningful ways. Until next time, keep seeking, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.